Welcome to video 2 on the structure of the neuron and some function for it. And so this is what I was talking about. Hopefully I painted a good enough picture in video 1. But here we see the cell body right in this region right here. This is what's going to form clumps, and they will clump into ganglia. You can see these short cytoplasmic extensions off the cell body called dendrites. All right, and then the long single extension that can have branches called collaterals sticking off of it, many and many. And you recall how we talked about this phenomena in chapter 11 with skeletal muscles, and now you can see in particular the many branches at the end here that connect every single muscle cell. And we'll talk about the endings in a special video here in a bit, but for now we're looking at dendrites that are the short extensions that number in the thousands off the cell body, which contains many organelles we're about to discuss, and then the single extension, very long, called the axon. That's the typical structure of a neuron. Let's look a little more deeply at the individual components of a neuron in the neural cell body, and you can see them all listed here on the right. Let's cover them one by one. That's a cool little video. I love this, where you can see a neuron firing to another neuron to another neuron. And if things were only that simple, but they aren't. They're much more complex than what even this is showing you. And we'll get into that complexity as well. So I've taken that same image and put it up in the corner for reference. And let's talk about these major organelles. Certainly very distinct is this incredibly large nucleus. And whenever you see large nuclei in cells, you know there's a lot of protein formation going to be going on, a lot of gene transcription and so forth. And there's a huge dark spot, that's the nucleolus, don't forget. The cytoplasm we'll call the perikaryon. I won't use that term too much. Of course it has mitochondria out here in the cytoplasm or perikaryon to produce energy. You'll see these dense collections of rough endoplasmic reticula. They actually have a unique name because they are so dense within cell bodies of neurons. The cytoskeletal elements you can see coursing throughout here. The axon has tremendous amounts of these elements in them called microtubules, if you recall from chapter 3. And then the microtubules are called neurotubules. I'll still call them microtubules, and you certainly can too. And microfilaments are still called microfilaments as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so Nissl bodies is the special designation for this huge amount of material here for rough endoplasmic reticulum, because we have so much protein formation going on that we need this kind of density within a neuron. It's a very distinct feature of a neuron to have this dense areas of rough endoplasmic reticula called Nissl bodies. These are actually what end up being forming what's called gray matter. Gray matter occurs when you're looking at large collections of cell bodies. We'll talk more about gray matter later. The dendrites that are highly branched, they're sometimes called trees. They're also sometimes called spines. Depends on what they appear like to whatever scientist happens to be naming them. They receive information from other neurons. They can also serve as sensory structures. There's a lot of things going on with dendrites. The big, long, singular process that's going to convey information from one neuron to another is called the axon. It carries the action potential that we're going to get into in gory detail here in the next video or two. And of course, if you don't have axon, you don't have communication among neurons, and the whole function and structural integrity of the setup of neurons goes to waste. Then there's the cytoplasm of the axon. Now we're talking about stuff just in the axon itself called the axoplasm. It contains all the structures that are in this extensively long region of the neuron. And then the membrane that surrounds it is the axolemma. There's a very specialized region up in here called the axon hillock. This is where the action potentials are actually generated. And so it attaches to the first part of the axon called the initial segment. And so these two together work to begin the action potential and then get it localized into the axon. So here we have our general setup right in this region of a neuron. Neurons exhibit branching to other structures, and they're called collaterals. Okay? And then at the ends of the axons, when they interface with other structures, they're called terminals. See some beautiful pictures here of some staining. This is the cell body right in this region, also known as the soma. These long, not so long, but sort of long extensions are the dendrites, and then the very long one that it disappears off the page is the axon. Yet more pictures with more labels. I encourage you to look at the notes, look at the PowerPoints that I've supplied in my face-to-face class. Excuse me, just bumped the camera. That I supplied in my face-to-face class, and look at these in a little more detail. You can see the huge cell body with its giant nucleus here, many dendrites extending off. These dark spots around are neuroglia, and we'll talk more about those later. There are 4 structural classifications of neurons. The first one that we want to talk about is, we'll go bottom up, is a anaxonic. All right? And typically these are only found in the brain. There's actually no axon present. They have a highly specialized purpose. We're not going to really deal with these again. The next type are called unipolar, and you'll notice uni, one, right? These typically have only one output process, but it splits. So the cell body kind of hangs off like an octopus head, and then you've got the branches that split here. One branch goes to form dendrites, one branch goes to form what's called a central process that takes information to the central nervous system. We'll talk about the localization of these neurons, but these are typically found in association with most sensory functions. Bipolar neurons, you'll see the cell body is centrally located. One extension goes to the dendrites, one extension is the axon. These are typically found in special senses, and we're talking about the eyes, hearing, and so forth. So these have a very specialized locale. And then the one that we typically follow is the multipolar neuron. That's the one we were looking at earlier, most common within the brain. So anaxonic neurons, typically small, they all look alike, all the cell processes. There's not an axon. Enough with that one. Bipolar neurons are, again, once again, small, one dendrite, one axon. The cell body is located in the center, and each one projects from the cell body. Unipolar neurons have a single cell body and a single process that exits from it, and then that process splits. All right? And then finally, we have the multipolar neurons that we've been looking at all along, even though you didn't know it. If a neuron is sensory, then we're talking about it, most of them being unipolar type. And if it's somatic, it most certainly is unipolar. All right? And this is going to relay the information from the outside world. All right? Now, if we're talking about visceral sensory neurons, they may be either unipolar or bipolar, depending on what the exact function is. Sensory receptors are 3 types. There are interoreceptors that monitor our organ function, exteroreceptors that are looking at the world around us, and proprioceptors that we will talk about in more detail in the coming chapters that relay information about the position of our joints and other structures in our body, our joints and limbs. Okay, so motor neurons, we know, are the efferent division divided into the somatic and autonomic systems. The somatic is largely heading to skeletal muscle, ANS, visceral muscle, involuntary control, and so forth. The functional classifications, not only do we have sensory and motor neurons, but we have inner neurons that directly connect the two together. And we'll see these play a key role in reflexes. But they're found everywhere, in the brain, in the spinal cord, many places in the periphery. Your inner neuron is actually the most common type of neuron. The more of these you have in a pathway from sensory to motor output, the greater and more complex the response will be. So let's look at the general setup here. We see the skin receptors detecting some type of sensation. It's coming into the dorsal aspect of the spinal cord. Rather than getting processed by the brain directly, first we're going to have an immediate output through an interneuron and then out via the motor neuron to cause your arm to move or something to